Hello, this is John Majori with Majori on Bowie.com. And I am here today with a very, very special guest, Jordan Rothacker. But before I introduce Jordan, let me just ask you, as long as you're here, hit like and subscribe, and you'll get a weekly interview with somebody who's going to be talking about some type of topic that's connected to David Bowie. And visit the blog, majorionbowie.com, for daily content. Yes, I update it daily, and most of the content's about David Bowie. But today, I'm just thrilled to be talking to Jordan, who is a writer from Athens, Georgia, holds both an MA in religion and a PhD in comparative literature from the University of Georgia. And I mentioned his academic background because I'm going to tell him something that he doesn't know about me. I double majored in government and religious studies, and all of this is relevant to today's discussion. So I thought you should know that about Jordan's background. Jordan is a very, very accomplished writer with essays, reviews, interviews, poetry, and fiction that has appeared in a range of publications, including Guernica, The Believer, and The Literary Hub. He serves as books editor at Statement of Record. The focus of our discussion today will be on his book, The Death of the Cyborg Oracle. You could see the cover behind me. The book itself is not directly about David Bowie, but Bowie's influence can be felt on every page. I read it. It's terrific. It's a fairly short book. If you have any interest, I highly encourage you to get it and to read it. I thought it was terrific. If Jordan doesn't run shrieking from this interview, I'm going to invite him to come back next month to discuss his upcoming release, The Shrieking of Nothing, which I haven't read yet, but I'm going to, and I'm looking forward to it. So Jordan, thank you, and welcome.
Thank you, John. That was a very nice, kind introduction. Yeah, you did your research. That's me. Nutshell me. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. It's wonderful to talk to a fellow appreciator of David Bowie.
Yeah. So before we get into the direct Bowie connections, why don't you describe what is the book about?
Okay. I am going to read the back cover copy. I mean, I know anyone can read that. We will describe more, but I'm always kind of like weirdly put off when someone asks a writer, like, can you describe your book? And if they can't, I'm always kind of confused. Like, you wrote this. I mean, I know that most writers are novelists and don't often want to change hats to being marketing, writers or publicists. But, if you can't sum up your own book, what are you doing? So I will read the back, though, which I was participated in summing up. It says here, we begin with a little quote. It's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism, said philosopher Frederick Jameson. And so I, begin the description with that. So the description of the book on the back is that it's 2220 and climate catastrophe has made most of the earth uninhabitable. In this future domed Atlanta, solar energy has ended want, but socialism would be more fun if the guilt of capitalism's role in the destruction of the earth wasn't inherited by its descendants. Out of this void, all goddesses and gods are reborn for worship, monotheism is verboten, and crime is divided into sacred and profane. Meet Assistant Sacred Detective Edwina Casaubon. She's just transferred from profane and working with the legendary sacred detective Rabbi Jakob Thinkowitz, Rabbinowitz. And not a moment too soon, someone has murdered the Oracle of Delphi.
Yeah. So I asked you to describe it because I'm always reluctant to describe what a book is about to the author of the book in case I get it wrong.
Well, I mean, I've taught enough literature that, I've said enough times that like there's no wrong answer. And then often with my students, I'll jokingly say, I mean, there are some wrong answers. There are no aliens or unicorns in this book, but I'm pretty sure that after reading it, you probably have a pretty good handle on it. Yeah. I'd love to hear your description of it.
Well, let me hold on that until we get a little further into the discussion. I will come back. I will tell you what I think, but I wanted to ask this question. I'm reading the question, and I'm reading the book, and I'm reminded that science fiction is often used to analogize situations that we exist in day-to-day life.
Yes.
And I wanted to ask you, why did you feel you needed to tell this story as science fiction? Could you have told the same or at least a similar story in a real world setting in Atlanta of 2024
Mhm.
without the dome?
I mean, it all kind of came to me kind of part and parcel. Like, that's it's a wonderful thing when books can happen like that. Like really, like one evening, like the whole Thinkowitz, the dome, the whole world came to me, and it came out of a couple different things. There was the oh, we lost the title of it right now. The the Pope's encyclical about climate change and being a custodian of the earth and capitalism. The name, oh yeah, Laudato Si, that guy.
Yeah.
That around the same time that Adbusters did this crazy cover, like the birth of a new mythology. That Adbusters cover and Laudato Si being both in my head, and yeah, just one night, it all came together.
Yeah.
And it's weird because I read the back cover of the book because otherwise it is really when people ask what the book's about, and I'm like, well, it's about this domed future, post-climate catastrophe and the subsequent fall of capitalism. And in that world, without the abstraction of capital, everyone fills that void with worshiping their own gods. People don't want to worship together because of capitalism and monotheism working together. So everyone worships their own god. All religion, all crime, which there's very little of, is divided into sacred and profane. The world is a dystopia outside the dome. Within the dome, it's kind of a utopia. And then you've got this wonderful rabbi detective, and he's got a new partner who's kind of his Watson, and they're solving her first crime in sacred and not in profane anymore. And it's someone has murdered the Oracle of Delphi. It was like that. It sounds like a lot to really yoke together, especially for a book that's about just under like 40,000 words. So yeah, for a novella to yoke that all together. So clearly I had to write a sequel, because after exploring that world and building it out enough on one book, I had to go back for more. So that's what the forthcoming book is, a sequel to that. But
So a little out of order. I know you have
yeah,
the book cover for The Shriek into Nothing. Do you
that's
want to
right.
show it to us?
Mm-hmm.
As we're talking, it has not yet been released, but just to give people a taste.
I've got this really roughed up version because I
Yeah.
literally printed and glued the cover. The cover was actually done before the book was. It's the same
Yeah.
cover art as the last one. Sam Grant, wonderful artist, who lives in Barcelona, brilliant photographer and illustrator, brilliant human. So I was very lucky that he did the covers for both of the books.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that too. So I just you you described all the elements of the book, which you managed to all fit together in this coherent and flowing way in, like you said, 40,000 words, which is pretty short. After I finished it, one of the things that struck me was you couldn't convey all of that in the title or the cover of the book. And so you named the book The Death of the Cyborg Oracle, which is actually also incredibly accurate. That is not an analogy. The book actually does revolve around the death of an oracle who was a cyborg.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And but the book is organized. I want to ask you a question about the way it's organized. The chapters are all named for lines from Bowie songs.
Yes.
Yet Bowie himself is only mentioned once in passing.
Yes.
So why is that? Why did you name the chapters after Bowie songs, and Bowie himself is not really a character in the book? What's the connection?
Well, I mean, even though it's science fiction, is set in the future. I mean, there's a realism to the book, of course. I mean, I'm fine calling the book science fiction. I'm not really into that kind of ghettoizing that happens with genre in terms. Brilliant things happen in genres. Literary fiction is its own genre, of course. And so so this book would also fit under like the title of the description of speculative fiction. And I think it's what maybe Margaret Atwood, who said that speculative fiction is, just a continuation of the world we have, and so none of the technology in this book is really anything that's that outlandish,
Yeah.
I mean, other than like harnessing solar power for like the full extent that they have within this dome, nothing is that like inconceivable that's in this text. And so the world that they're living in is a world that's, our world in 200 years. And so the story is told in first person by Casaubon, as you've seen. And so as you read, you realize that she's talking directly to the reader. This is her report, and so the second one is the next case they do, and that's her report also. So the narrative is staged as if she's talking to the future. She's
Yeah.
talking to people after the future that this is, and telling them about how they've recovered from the world that we now are creating. And so she's telling the future. It's kind of like a message to their future, and she's writing it as her report, like what happened in the case. And so in that sense, she and I'm sure you would bring this up, but the mention of Bowie in here refers to Bowie as a profane prophet.
Yeah.
And so the way that the world of this future is kind of built off the partly ashes of our world is that they're taking inspiration from the best stuff of now and all of the past before now. And so Bowie's a prophet for them, a profane prophet, a secular prophet, someone who that this new secular society where everyone worships their own individual god, goddess, deity, but the things that they're agreeing on in a secular way, people like Nina Simone, she's mentioned the second one, Whitman is in this first one, David Bowie, these kind of profane prophets that are kind of helping guide their world with inspiration. Mariam Kaba is in the second one, mentioned the second one. And so she's writing to the future. She's writing out of her own experience, and in the world that they live in, that she lives in, Bowie is just kind of a given for everyone. And so these titles might be lost on someone who isn't a huge Bowie fan reading this book, but the idea is that in her future, the future of this book within the text, anyone reading her report would get all the Bowie references, that he is a part of their world. And I think the reference that you're talking about where Bowie is actually discussed is a chapter that's named for Life on Mars. It's the Life on Mars chapter, where it kind of confronts him being a profane prophet for them.
So that's interesting. So that chapter also makes, within the chapter itself, it makes a direct reference to a lyric from that song, Life on Mars, where the character refers to herself as the girl with the mousy hair.
Yeah.
And I actually think that chapter sort of drives a lot of what's going on in the book home, because let me hold off on that too.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sort of teasing what's coming up, but some of the other chapters have titles that are fairly obvious in terms of what they relate to, like Serious Moonlight. What happens within the chapter has something to do with the moon being a little mysterious as to exactly what. And there's another chapter, Thunder and Lightning, which is a line out of the song that appeared on David Live's Lightning Frightening. And again, there's something within the chapter that has to do literally with thunder and lightning. But some of the other chapters, I didn't even catch the connection. And I'm wondering, and this is, it's a lead up to this question, which is something that I've done myself, and I've encountered others who do this as well. Do you find yourself, either just while writing this book or outside the context of writing, organizing your thoughts using Bowie, his lines, his albums, concepts as an organizing tool?
Maybe in kind of discrete ways for particular things. I mean, clearly for this project, that became the guide, and that one of the things I kind of published when this first came out, and I will be doing a second one, is that there's a wonderful blog called Large Hearted Boy. David Gutowski runs it. And one of the things he does really well on Large Hearted Boy, and so it's a literary site, but also involves music, is that he'll have writers provide a playlist to a book. And so I've done it a few times for a few of my books. And it was like one of the greatest honors that I've had with the first time he asked me to do one, because I've loved so many people's playlists. And so the playlist I did for this, if you haven't seen it, it does rotate kind of around the Berlin albums, the Berlin years albums, but then also a lot of Diamond Dogs, the kind of apocalyptic nature of Diamond Dogs. So that became a real guide. Like, if I went with the title "The Death of the Cyborg Oracle," because, as you said, it is actually very literal, and I liked how Philip K. Dickey it kind of sounds. But the other working title for this book was almost going to be "We Are the Dead," and so just straight Bowie song. And so with the second book, I went with a line from us, straight from a Bowie song. But otherwise, I thought of calling this "We Are the Dead," and so there's that. Bowie helped kind of, yoke it. It also helped a way of like me understanding the character if she's also influenced by Bowie, but it's such a way that it's just like normal for their world, that she's
Yeah.
writing her like, they don't use the word police, but she's writing her, safety report of what happened to the Cyborg Oracle and the Oracle of Delphi, and she's just breaking it up in a very clear way, thematically, with lines from Bowie that we would suppose that anyone in her world would get, that they would just get
Yeah.
the reference of.
I was going to ask not if you were going to name it "We Are the Dead," but did it occur to you to name it "The Strange Ones in the Dome"?
Mm. No, actually, what's funny is one of the original lines. I named a chapter after one of the original lines that actually really also motivated. So it wasn't just the Pope's encyclical. It wasn't just that cover of Adbusters. There's that line. It's killing me. Chrome under chrome and glass. Cold nights under chrome and glass.
Yeah.
It's Bring Me the Head of the Disco King.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And those lines, like I'd actually thought of writing something, a Bowie-inspired sci-fi novel based out of those lines before this. And so that kind of those lines and the science fiction movie Metropolis and a lot of the vibe, particularly of the album Heroes, of of the Berlin trilogy, really helped kind of build out this world to me that like there's a bit of like like I'm sure I don't know if you're going to ask, but like there's a bit of like influence of like Fifth Element and oddly the movie Demolition Man with Wesley
Sure.
Snipes and
Yeah.
in this influencing this, but there's a lot of like that line and kind of what Bowie liked of Metropolis and kind of romanticism meeting Art Nouveau and the kind of that early modernism kind of came together and kind of how this world is imagined in my head.
Yeah.
Bowie really helped guide a lot of this.
Yeah. I saw that. I also, just not to get too far afield, but I also was imagining Blade Runner.
Oh yeah. Like kind of like it's like Blade Runner in a way meets the brightness of Fifth Element and Demolition Man, because like there is kind of like even that Demolition Man, there's a weird kind of like corny and hokiness within the dome here that like is intentional, that like like there's a of course there's a guilt, you've read this, there's that kind of the epigenetic imprint of the trauma of billions of people dying and the earth being destroyed through climate change, and so those who are alive in the dome live through a kind of like a in a slightly broken spirit, or at least a tempered spirit, because of that guilt. But at the same time, again, in the dome there is no transphobia, no racism, no capitalism, there's no money, and there's no want, but everyone's a little, and the way that balances out is because we're all a little tempered, greed makes you feel a little nauseated, and beyond in this book. And so the world is a little corny in there, it's nice, I think.
Well, so that's actually something else I wanted to get at, which is, so this is set in a post-apocalyptic setting, but the world that exists under the dome does not strike me as a dystopia. It strikes me as a utopia.
Yeah, but it's a utopia that only exists through the dystopia that like we've awfully are doing to ourselves.
Yeah.
I live like 3 hours south of Asheville, like this is awful.
Yeah, well, so we're conducting this interview days after the terrible hurricane hit, and I didn't even bother to ask if you're okay. I don't know if where you live was hit.
Oh no, we're very lucky in Asheville, in Athens, Georgia. Atlanta had a lot of issues. There are other parts of Georgia, and then we've just had a chemical plant explosion also in Atlanta. But yeah, Asheville, I mean, I've got a lot of friends there. It's a place I really love going to, always have. My wife and I, it's a very special place for us. So it's pretty rough right now.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that, and it's really what I've seen seems horrific. And not to relate it back to the book, but the concept of environmental apocalypse is, it's nigh in our world. So there's a relevance to this story that you're telling. So we're sort of touching on big themes, but let me sort of ask a little question before getting back to the big themes. There, the other thing I noticed as reading is that there are little David Bowie Easter eggs throughout the book. There was a reference to Mr. Touchwick, and there are some performers who perform instrumental songs that I'm guessing the casual fan might not recognize the name of the songs, even if they would recognize what they sound like. So I was wondering if you were planting these as Easter eggs for Bowie fans, or were you using Bowie to fill in the blanks? Like, you need a name, you pull out Alger Touchwick.
Kind of a mixture of both,
Yeah.
There's a real I can't help but be a Joycean, and like Bowie was also a bit of a, like, so when I was 17, I was a member of the International James Joyce Foundation. I was that kind of kid, and I would get the newsletter, and like I still might even have somewhere around here. One of the newsletters they sent had like a little piece with like a quote from Bowie in an interview at the time, and where he brought up that someone had asked him like why he references like Joyce or Burroughs in his work, and he's like, it's the fucking cornerstone of our civilization. Why wouldn't I?
Yeah.
And, like I loved Bowie at the time as a teenager. I loved Joyce, and those things coming together was really important for me. And then eventually understanding how literary, Bowie was, was part of like my whole development, as a human. And so, the Easter eggs are always there for myself. If no one else gets them, that's fine. I mean, my first novel, And Wind Will Wash Away, I mean, it's 170,000 words, 400 pages, but I mean, it is, it's dense, but in a way that I always hoped, like you can read it on one level and not get all the references, and that's totally fine. If you read it on another level and get all those references, great. I'm not faulting anyone for not getting them, but like they're for myself, and therefore, the reader who picks up on it, and so, yeah, it became a fun kind of game aspect. But you're also right. There are times when it's like, need a character name, and sometimes, like a name can be like utterly symbolic and totally necessary. And there are clearly those in this book where you're like, that name kind of seems to mean something. I wonder, where that's going. But then there's also just people got to be named, and there's a scheme to often the naming, and like, in their world, and it even comes up, I think, if not in this one, in the second one, but, in their world of this kind of, resurgence is actually the motto of Atlanta. The phoenix is a symbol of Atlanta. So this is one of many books I've, a handful of books I've set in Atlanta, and it's a wonderful city for the kind of themes I like to play with. It's a feminine named city. You don't have a lot of that. Atlanta, this feminizing, one of the Atlantic, can't remember the name of the company, but one of the railroads companies, you've got this Atlantic, whatever was the railroad company. Atlanta is this, shortened version. But so this sense of, of names, sometimes, like a lot of the character names you've seen are very natural things, seasons or flowers. And for people who are kind of, alienated from the earth, living in this dome, that's what they're identifying with or yearning for. So that's also kind of part of the scheme of the naming. But if sometimes the names are named after or based off of someone I know that the character is, a shade of or based off of. Sometimes it's totally random. Sometimes it's a total joke. Sometimes there's one person out there who's going to get it and be like, I see what he did there.
Yeah.
I was even finishing up and I was like, there are a couple of characters I haven't named. So I really even asked people, I was like, anyone want to be in this book? And someone's like, I'll pre-order it right now. I was like, cool, stick your name in. That's great. Need a character name.
Yeah. I live in Albany, New York, and the state capitol is here, which is a fascinating building. There's a staircase, this carved staircase that has all these faces carved into the walls, and many of them are historic figures, but some of them are random people. And the story is that when it was being constructed, some of the artisans took bribes by people who wanted their faces in the walls.
Yeah, I mean, like you gotta fill out a large group of people, know. Like, I'd imagine if you're writing like Germinal and you're Zola, you got like 1,000 characters, You're just grabbing anyone you see and just sticking them in,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's get back to the concept of dystopia and utopia and the apocalypse, because this book, we're talking about David Bowie, and there are several themes within the book that relate to themes of some of his songs. And as we've already said, one of those themes has to do with the apocalypse and dystopia. So there, you mentioned Diamond Dogs, which is a very obvious album that has to do with that topic. Almost every treatment of Bowie on this topic is very negative, though. There isn't that, he doesn't really describe in any song I could think of as a utopia that follows the collapse. He describes in a song like 5 Years the coming collapse, or a song like A Panic in Detroit, the collapse as it's happening, or a song like Sunday, which is really the aftermath of some kind of catastrophe. And all of these visions are terrible. They're terrifying. Is there a suggestion in this book that we are so far gone as a society that the whole thing needs to be wiped out and we need to start over again as a species or as a world?
That's not my vibe. Like, I'm not an accelerationist in any way. I don't want to, sacrifice, the most vulnerable amongst us ever for anything. And so, the hope I find in Bowie, even in his most dystopic moments, of course, is always love, right? I mean, you've got that in Heroes. You've got you have this, the guard, firing over our heads, and the lover's kiss beneath it. You've got but is it in We Are the Dead where we jump off the bridge? They hold hands and jump off the bridge into the water. Is that on Diamond Dogs?
Yeah, I think it's in the Sweet Thing sequence.
Yeah, and so I mean that kind of thing, that like We Are the Dead, the darkness of Diamond Dogs. It's still, what does it come down to? Where is the hope? The hope is love, and Bowie's getting that he's got that in Diamond Dogs because it's coming out of 1984, right? I mean, that's what they're able to do. They're able to Julia and Winston are able to meet secretly. They're able to experience, romantic love. I mean, true, it's always very boy girl and that and these songs, but they're able to experience, romantic love. They're able to connect to, two humans, interpersonal relationships. Those are the kind of things that, can conquer fascism, and can hopefully, save us if we can all meet on levels of kind of openness and love and compassion, and it doesn't have to be romantic, and so in Bowie, at least, those are those moments. Of course, he's writing also rock songs, and he's coming out of a very America 1950s tradition where boy girl love is aw shucks, the way to go, and I mean, we've got probably my favorite Bowie song, if that's going to be a question, I'll get to
it is.
I mean, I've got a pretty solid like top 10 list, but like the Ashes to Ashes might be number one. And it's a pretty important song to me. And so it's I mean, I've had friends who've died of heroin overdoses. Stay clean tonight. The message of the song, I'm happy, hope you're happy too, there's a lot going on there for me. But so the Shrieking of Nothing, the second title, I mean, that song though begins where he's referencing what the most famous maybe sequel ever in rock music. Before he's writing a sequel in rock music, it's Buddy Holly, right? He's referencing Peggy Sue, and then Peggy Sue got married, and so he begins talking about referencing back to Major Tom at the beginning of that song, and then he's doing the same kind of bit that Buddy Holly's doing, and so he's talking out of that tradition. He's writing rock. That's where white rock begins in the America in the 50s, and so he's adding all those other layers to it, but it's always kind of rooted in that, I think, with the tradition of rock music for Bowie. And so so that's where his hope lies in his rock songs, is these kind of boy girl love, but as I think there's hope all over Bowie's work. And so, yes, he's right. He likes dystopias. He likes writing songs that are dystopias, but you can have a weirdly optimistic book like mine that still can have that optimism coming from Bowie, I believe.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you one more question right now, which will also tease what we're going to be talking about next week. And I think, Key, you alluded to it a little bit earlier, which is, in this world, everybody worships their own God, their own individual God. There's a line in the book about cults being, I don't think it's phrased this way, but cults being illegal. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I took from that cults meaning organized religion. So there are characters who are worshiping all kinds of gods from different historic pantheons, some of which are made up. They're from fiction. There's capital is described as a religion. that brought the ruination of the world. I'm looking at the quote that I pulled from the book. Capitalism became too strong when worshipped en masse, and that too much of the society was moving in the same direction. So, is there a suggestion here that a kind of religious or slavish devotion to a unified mode of being is fatal to society, that too much homogeny is deadly to our species or our culture?
Yes, I mean that certainly messages there. I hadn't thought of it as like too much homogeny, that like but that is certainly there, and like was, I mean, I guess more of like a subconscious intention of mine. Yes, that like difference is good was certainly what I thought of, different, that embracing the otherness and otherness within ourselves, otherness within our community, this kind of not othering the other,
Yeah.
And so, kind of, and it's a world that, this is 200 years in the future. Like it's already kind of built itself up out of the worst. And so this is it, kind of on the road to doing better as a world. And so it's not so much so yeah, there is clearly, a fascism to, homogeneity, that we would like to avoid, that I think would be good to avoid, of course. And then there's also, you use the term organized religion. And so more in the book, it's about the idea of kind of group worship, like people, a collective belief in an abstraction is, I think, the danger. Not, but when you have a term like organized religion, it's something that I've kind of always picked at. You have people who like, spirituality is fine, but organized religion. Organized religion doesn't have, like, I think people are often using it by like mass group involvement in the worship, but like, if I were just to pick up a book about a religion and to follow its cosmology and worldview and to do the routines, the rituals, the practice of that faith, that's organized religion, even if I'm just alone, like it's been organized over thousands of years. It's been organized recently. If it's a newer religion, that's an organized religion. It has an organized worldview. It has a cosmology. And if I participate in it, even just without anybody else, I'm still being involved in organized religion, that it's a constructed thing. And so, people who in this world have the freedom, and I don't know if this is something you would get to, but to me, one of the biggest things about the world they live is they have the freedom to choose what they worship, and they have the freedom to change their mind for what they worship. And nobody has a problem with that. That's actually kind of embraced, like the, change is, when it's thought out, when it's is a healthy thing. And so, and belief around change. You meet someone, you mention who they worship. Next time you meet them, they worship someone else. You're like, it's a good for you type thing. It doesn't seem odd to them to change what you believe based on who you are or who you become or new evidence or just interest, right? I mean, no one in this world necessarily is like challenging the beliefs of somebody else, and in their world, the beliefs aren't hurting anybody else either.
Well, so I said I was going to take a break, but now you said two things I want to ask about, and then we'll take a break. So this is not addressed in the book unless I missed it, but do individuals have the freedom to choose somebody else's God? If 30 people decided to worship the same God and come together, is that permissible in this world?
Well, yeah. So I mean, like I've got a lot of like there is some artful vagueness that goes on, there's some questions that I haven't like fully but like, so there isn't like there are not laws about it, but like it's frowned upon, and like and I think there's kind of like an impulse in everyone, kind of like the impulse against greed that they have, that this impulse of like any kind of group focus on an abstraction, is the kind of thing that people would feel as being dangerous. And so within this dome, there are people probably worshiping the same God who don't meet each other, and that's fine, and as you saw, I mean, you alluded to a chapter called Serious Moonlight, and I don't mind describing that chapter. They're all meeting at like the Fox Theater in Atlanta, and they're having a moon pantheon celebration. So everyone meeting there, they all worship different moon gods and goddesses. And they're having just a big moon festival, but they're not all worshiping the same god or goddess. Kind of in a way, they're kind of not all worshiping the same moon, if they're all worshiping the moon through these different narratives and cultural trappings or whatever of each god. And so it's, they're all meeting to kind of have this kind of moon revelry. It's a full moon night. They're all various, worshipers of different cultural aspects of moon god or goddesses throughout time. But in a way, it's a party, and it's a way of just kind of bringing people together at the same time. People are living their lives. I'm trying to make this book, the world of this domed future as real as possible. What are people eating? What are they doing? How are
Yeah.
they living with these kind of trauma, and also with this freedom. And the trauma helps keep that freedom a little quieter.
Yeah.
It's people are living maybe a little quieter, a little less zeal about dangerous things like abstractions, and group involvement and belief in abstractions.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you that chapter with the you revealed what it's about, the different worshipers of different moon gods. The thought that occurred to me when I was reading that is this concept that that I've encountered, I'm sure you've encountered, that we all worship the same God, or all religions in the world that we live in are actually um, uh, about basically the same thing, but the different religions are trying to describe the same deity differently.
Mm-hmm.
This is not that. This
No.
is right. This is not. They're all worshiping the same moon god with different names.
Yeah.
They're all worshiping different moon gods, but it's like the diversity is allowing them to come together. So instead of sameness being unifying, difference is being unifying, which is kind of Bowie-esque.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and what very Bowie-esque is transformation, right? I mean, like, and like, I'm a big fan of the writer William T. Vollmann. He's a good friend of mine. I've been his research assistant. We're good buddies, and he often talks about American Ovidianism. And it's a term that I actually haven't pushed him on, but I've been kind of working in my own way and kind of writing about things around it. And I think it's something that kind of Bowie from the outside valued or saw in the idea of America, or the American experience, as kind of metamorphosis. American Ovidianism, this idea of like becoming who you want to be, who you choose to be. And there's I think a real kind of conservatism in this country that fights against that, because
Yeah.
in some ways it's very dangerous, because it is true freedom. Like, being who you are is a great freedom to be. And so, like, and what could be a truer freedom is what I'm getting at in these books, is that like of what you worship, what you
Yeah.
believe in this thing, and especially when it's beyond any kind of, material evidential support, right? I mean, to believe something that you have no evidence for is a way of an act of hope. It is a way, we could say it's a foolish act, it's a silly act, but it's also it's an act of hope. It's an act of it's an aesthetic kind of act also. It's an act of true, sense of self and belief. I mean, and like belief in self, to believe in something beyond evidence and support. And if we before we get to it, if it is a question, I'm like a deep, proud agnostic. Like
I was not going to ask that. Yeah, so I keep saying that's the last question before break, but let me ask you this one last one, and then we'll go on break. Just because I don't want to lose the thread. So this is not described in the book, but I imagine that you worked this out in your head, that in the 200 years between the catastrophe and the story, the society came to the conclusion that capitalism was a religion, which I think in the world we live in, most people don't think of capitalism as a religion, or consumerism, or that our society is worshiping material pursuits. That you might push back on this, but the homogeneity of our society being devoted to this type of worship blinded us to the threats that led to the catastrophe. And then in that 200 years, the emerging society concluded that diversity of worship was the way to the future. What happened? How did the thinking evolve in the time that we don't know about, between the world we live in and this future world?
I mean, it's evolving through the people, however they're surviving, and the world's getting hotter and all that stuff over the 200 years. They're watching hundreds of millions and billions of people die, and they're watching, island nations be gone. They're watching, valleys of cities and civilizations be flooded and be gone. They're hearing that news. They're losing, power and infrastructure and support. Whatever's happening in those 200 years, it is awful to behold and see. And so those who survive are surviving in this, this wake of trauma. And inseparable, the connection between capitalism, which runs kind of like a like a cancer. It's just constantly has to spread. and what's, when you mention, not a lot of people think of it as a religion now. I mean, Walter Benjamin, it is mentioned in the book, Thinkowitz does mention it. Walter Benjamin wrote an essay, about, capitalism as a god, in I think 1927. He
Mhm.
published it. And then of course I have Thinkowitz mention both Walter Benjamin and Trent Reznor in like one breath from
Yes, I know. Yes.
yeah, God money, do anything for you. God
Yeah.
money, just tell me what you want me to. Um, and but so and Agamben, a contemporary philosopher who I really like, Giorgio Agamben. I mean, he also brings that back up in a recent collection. I think Potentialities. I've got a couple of his books next to my bed that I've been reading recently, and so he even mentions, he brings up the same kind of thread of like of capitalism as a religion unto itself. And
Yeah.
and like, we really do, we fill the void of abstraction with it, and you can, it's not too difficult to even do like a Marxist Nietzschean line, of the Enlightenment of the 19th century of that of dethroning of God or gods, and then replacing it with capital, with capitalism, and everything that comes out of it, colonialism, race, all these things that are rooted into this this capitalist framework that we've been living in, um and so I think what I was just hearing from you though is what I was understanding about my own book is that the world they live in is a world without hierarchy, and I think that's the
Mhm.
most important thing to understand. That
Yeah.
it's like, and I think that's important thing that Nietzsche is really doing in his dethroning of the Christian God is kind of de-hierarchizing our world. And then we talk about postmodernists doing that, getting rid of this death of a meta narrative, of like Western European meta narrative. But yeah, it's they're in a world in this dome, and you do have the sovereign in this first one who is kind of nominated, who is chosen. It's a real kind of almost Cincinnatus type thing, where
Yeah.
he's out of the people, doing this job of the people, out of the people, and calling him the sovereign is also kind of this Bataille, Agamben kind of philosophy stuff I write about. But yeah, that you have a world without hierarchy, that like no god is better than any other god.
Yeah.
The term I use in there is, you mentioned that I have a degree in religion. I used to teach religion at the University of Georgia. The world they live in is the term is henotheism,
Yeah.
Theism, where you believe in one God, your God, but you don't rule out the existence of other gods. It's kind of a very light kind of polytheism. Like other gods might exist, but mine is the best. And we can kind of describe the world of like that you read in like the Tanakh and Jewish scriptures, like Abraham is kind of a henotheist. Like
Right.
he's not saying that that Elohim Yahweh is the only God, but like it is the he's the God who chose him and is the God of those people. There are other gods out there. There's the better God, but they're not worshiping or believing in the other gods, but they're not saying that the other gods don't exist.
Yeah. Moses even more famously so.
Oh yeah, yeah. And so
Yeah.
so we have that in this kind of world, that it's you can devote your life to these things, and then you can switch and devote your life to a different god, or goddess,
Yeah.
or deity, however you want to do it. And it can be very important, as it should be important, to fill the void in in yourself, to fill abstractions, to have touchstones, to have, I mean, there's a definition of religion as just that which orients you in time and space, and doesn't have to have any kind of deity, and so so for some people their attachment to a god or goddess and this is lighter than it is for others, and and that's all okay too.
Yeah. Well, this is a great place to take a break. And Jordan, thank you very much for joining me today. It's been a fascinating conversation. And if people watching or listening to this agree with that, you'll be delighted to know that Jordan's going to be coming back next week. So let's sign off for now. And I look forward to our continued conversation.
Excellent, thank you. It was really wonderful talking to you, John.